Good afternoon or evening and welcome. Kensington Senior Living has 7 unique communities, 4 located in Virginia, Maryland, and New York, and 3 sister communities located in California. Kensington is truly privileged to support care partners and professionals from coast to coast. Kensington focuses on relationship-based care built on the foundation that our promise to love and care for your family as we do our own. Promise is what initially drew me to become a member of the Kensington family, as my father lived at Kensington for almost 8 years. It is programs such as the one you are attending now that are so important for those of us walking through a caregiving journey to hear from expert professionals on keeping us current with the latest advances in care management and treatment of conditions that affect seniors and their families. As people with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias progress in their journey and the ability to use words is lost, families need new ways to connect. Today, we will explore how communication takes place when someone has Alzheimer's, learn to decode the verbal and behavioral message delivered by someone with dementia, and identify strategies to help you connect and communicate at each stage of the disease. Please join me in welcoming Vanessa Souza with the Alzheimer's Association. Vanessa?
Thanks so much, Susan, and thanks everybody for being here today. We're going to talk a little bit this afternoon or evening, depending on where you are, about effective communication strategies, just like Susan said, how to communicate well with your loved one across all the stages of dementia.
And I must say, I have to interrupt you really quickly to our audience. I have known Vanessa for years. And I've done events with her before, and she is so knowledgeable that I'm just so pleased that you're here today to share with the audience. And I also want to just reiterate to the audience that everyone will receive a copy of today's webinar to share with friends and family, because some of these techniques and strategies are so helpful. I utilized them myself when my father had Alzheimer's, and it's just very, very helpful for the caregiver and for the 5 people directly, affected by the person, unfortunately, that has the dementia or Alzheimer's. So thank you, Vanessa, and I'll leave you to your presentation now.
My pleasure. I'm going to go ahead and share these with you all. Just a little bit about me before we really get going. As Susan said, my name is Vanessa. I work at the Alzheimer's Association here in Northern California and Northern Nevada. I'm based in San Jose. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and my specialty is working with folks who have dementia, Alzheimer's disease, other kinds of cognitive impairment, and their family members and friends. So I've been with the Alzheimer's Association about 6 years, but before I came to the Alzheimer's Association, I worked in assisted living in memory care. So I was a memory care director. I was an executive director in assisted living. I was also a social worker for a couple of different adult day programs, adult day care and adult day health. So my whole career has really been around communicating with folks with dementia and their loved ones and helping to facilitate that. And I'm really happy to be able to do that with you today as well. Now, Susan did a good job of bringing up our learning objectives, so we won't spend too much time here. But we're going to talk about how to communicate across 3 major stages of dementia: early, middle, and late. So folks may not fall neatly into one bucket of early, middle, or late stage. You might notice some of these communication tips will be helpful for you, even if you're caring for someone who is in the very early stages. You might find that some of those early stage tips still work really well for your person who's a little further along in your journey. But we're going to identify some strategies to make sure that you're able to connect well with them, regardless of what their current communication style is. And this is relevant for folks living with any kind of dementia, not just Alzheimer's disease. So just to sort of set the stage, let's talk about what communication is. Communication is way more than just talking and listening, right? It's about sending and receiving messages. It comes through in our attitude, our tone of voice, facial expressions, body language, right? Our communication is how we express who we are, and it's how we relate to one another. Now, a lot of the time we are using words to do that, right? But as the brain changes due to Alzheimer's disease or some other kind of dementia, people are going to lose their ability to speak and they're going to lose their ability to understand speech in the usual ways. Folks may have a smaller vocabulary. They may have more difficulty expressing themselves verbally. They may have more difficulty understanding what you say. And so the better we understand those changes and the better we focus on some of these other modes of communication, the better we can connect with folks living with dementia at any point in the disease. Now, Alzheimer's disease and other dementias are what we call progressive diseases, right? That means that the symptoms get worse over time. Things change along the journey. As Alzheimer's disease and any other kind of dementia progresses, folks are going to have changing symptoms. And one of those symptoms is that they will be losing the ability to communicate through words. And they will lose the ability to understand the words that you or other folks speak to them. But what's really important to remember is that people retain a sense of self, an inner self, throughout all stages of the disease. So elements of that person's unique personality, elements of what makes them them, is going to remain a part of them throughout the entire disease. And that's the part you want to connect with. You want to reach out to the person's inner self, to their uniqueness. And that's how you're going to communicate with them effectively, stay connected. And really importantly, this is how you're going to make sure that they still have a voice, even if they're not able to articulate things very clearly anymore. Now, in the early stage, many people still are able to convey their thoughts and feelings pretty well through language. They're able to make decisions about their future care, but they may have some difficulty. So they may just misinterpret what people say. If you make a joke, they might take that joke literally. If you say something sarcastic, you might hurt their feelings. These sorts of small changes, okay? This is the time when you can ask the person how they'd like to be helped. And we'll talk a little bit more about this stage in just a moment. In the middle stage is when you start to see the most significant changes in language. This is when folks start to use really basic short sentences. They may repeat the same sentences over and over again, and they're going to start to rely more on your tone of voice, your facial expression, those other nonverbal expressions. But even though they're starting to have more trouble using words, they still really need that emotional connection, and they really need to feel like they're having a meaningful interaction, that they're contributing, that their activity has purpose. In the later stage of the disease, folks may still respond to some familiar words. They might respond to familiar stories, phrases, or especially to music, but they're going to have a very hard time either speaking or understanding speech. And so at this point, you really want to use body language and the 5 senses to connect. Again, in the early stage, the changes may be very, very subtle, and you might not see any at all. For some people, there might be some shift in their ease in conversation. So you may notice, for example, that they're withdrawing from conversations or sort of losing track. You may find that they are taking longer to respond when you ask them something. That's because the speed of processing is slowing down. So it takes them longer to process what you've said and longer to come up with a response. Folks may struggle with decision making. They may struggle especially with multiple step problem solving. And they may have difficulty finding the right words to share. It's really critical at this point to come to terms with the diagnosis yourself, talk together about it. And if the person is in denial of their diagnosis or simply isn't aware of their diagnosis, can't acknowledge their diagnosis, you can still communicate with them about their wishes, right? About the things that they want. This is the time when you can talk about, in the future, if there's things that you can't tell me you want, what would you like me to do? Now we're going to watch a brief...
Communicating in the early stages of dementia with the person with the disease is important. At that time, you still have language as a tool, so you can learn things about what they might prefer as the disease progresses. For example, as the disease progresses, a person might have difficulty finding words. Caregivers often struggle to know what to do in that moment. Early on in the disease, you can ask. You can say, if you ever have trouble coming up with the word, Would you rather that I jump in and give you the word, or do you want me to wait and allow you some time so you can find it on your own?
One of the best ways to make sure that you're offering the right kind of help with communication is just to ask. So as Martha said in that video, if you can't come up with the right word, do you want me to give you time, or do you want me to make a suggestion? You can keep your own sentences really clear and straightforward, which helps the person avoid feeling lost. So stick to short sentences, avoid long explanations, and take your cue from the person that you're speaking with. So make sure that you're not talking down to them, but make sure that you simplify so that they can understand. For example, when I'm speaking with someone that has dementia, maybe a member in one of my support groups, if they say, Vanessa, when is our next meeting? I always say just quite simply what the date is. I don't say, we normally meet on the second Wednesday, but this month I'm going to be on vacation. So actually we're going to meet on the fourth Wednesday, and I'm going to move the time from 1 till 2, right? I'll just say we're going to meet on this date at 2 o'clock. Simple, straightforward, and to the point. Leave extra time for conversations. Even simple conversations are going to take a little extra time. Keep in mind that folks' conversational needs are going to change. Over time, that is going to change. But right now, the person with dementia in the early stage really needs to have their voice heard. So meet them right where they are today. Include them in conversations that affect them, including conversations that plan for the future. And in particular, you may have to be their advocate and make an extended effort to include them. For example, if you're at a family party, if you're at a barbecue and there's a lot of hustle and bustle and people talking, someone might ask you, perhaps even over your loved one's head, they might say, hey, how's Bill been doing? It's your job to help Bill communicate and turn to him and say, I don't know, Bill, how have you been? Right? Invite them into the conversation and help them engage. Including them that way can be really empowering for them, and it helps them feel like they matter and that they have an effect on the conversation. You want to keep in mind that everybody's symptoms are different, and that someone who has difficulty speaking, articulating things back to you may still understand you very, very well. So avoid making assumptions about their level of understanding. Ask, speak directly to them. Communicate in the way that's most comfortable for them. So, for example, many folks with dementia, if they are tech savvy, like to text or email, because then they have a written record of what you talked about. Some people with dementia enjoy talking on the phone, but for a lot of people, the phone is very difficult because the phone call is just words, right? There's none of that nonverbal communication. So something like talking in person, hopping on a video chat, like a Skype or a FaceTime or a Zoom, might be a much better option than that phone call. Sometimes sending a letter in the mail, sending a greeting card is a great way to communicate, because again, they can go back and look back over what you said. It's okay to laugh. Sometimes humor lightens the mood and makes communication easier. For example, if someone misspeaks like I just did, it's okay to laugh at that as long as the person's feelings aren't hurt. Be honest about your feelings to the best of your ability. Don't pull away to try and shelter them from the way you feel. Your love, your friendship, and your support are really important to that person with dementia, and they need support from you, right? So by engaging with them, by being honest and frank about your feelings and asking about theirs, you're going to show them that you are invested in staying connected with them and in caring about them. Those are all tips for the early stage. And in the middle stage, you're going to start seeing more significant changes. Okay. So in the middle stage, you'll see significantly increased difficulty in finding the right words. You'll notice that the person's vocabulary has really shrunk, that they're going to start relying on some old reliable phrases. For example, I used to work with a gentleman named Carl, and every single morning I'd say, how you doing, Carl? And every single morning he would say to me, oh, fair to middling, right? That was a familiar phrase. He knew that he could every single morning, if someone asked how he was doing, he could pull up that phrase and he would have said the right thing. Okay, so folks may lean on that. Let them do that. Develop, maybe a routine back and forth with them like that in a script sort of sense. Folks may invent new words to describe familiar things. So for example, instead of talking about their watch, they may call it the hand clock. They might talk about that thing over there and sort of talk around the idea of it. Instead of saying the living room, they might say that place in there with the TV. They're trying to talk around the word loss. Folks in the middle stage also really easily lose their train of thought. So if someone is giving you an answer, for example, if you've said, "What would you like for lunch?" and they haven't answered right away, and you ask again, "Did you want to have lunch?" They're going to lose their train of thought and no longer be able to answer your question. So it's really helpful for them if you, first of all, give extra time. But second of all, if you're going to ask the question again, ask the question exactly the same way. So instead of rephrasing, which we would often do, in a conversation with somebody who doesn't have dementia, right? We might rephrase, try a different way. When talking with someone with dementia, we want to try and use the exact same phrase. That gives them extra time to process what you said. If you change and say something else, that distracts their focus from trying to figure out what you said the first time. They're now trying to figure out what you said the second time, and it's going to be more difficult for them. You might also notice that they're just speaking less frequently because talking is getting harder. They might pull back from conversations. They might just not answer you as often, and they might seem a little bit withdrawn. You'll notice folks communicating through behavior rather than words more often. So for example, you might notice that people, instead of telling you that they're in a bad mood, might have some sort of verbal outburst or might just walk out of the room. You might notice if somebody is rummaging around in the kitchen, opening and closing cabinets, looking around in the fridge, they might be doing that instead of coming to you and saying, "I'm hungry," right? So you're going to see that communication through behavior, and behavior is going to be their language more and more as the disease progresses. You might also notice if someone has a native language other than English, that they might be reverting to that native language. You might notice that folks are starting to rely on curse words, sort of forbidden language, right? Or maybe using repeated phrases from something they've heard recently, like something on TV or something someone else said. So all of this is going to be stuff that you're going to notice occurring gradually. In dementia, in Alzheimer's disease, but in most forms of dementia, changes are slow and gradual. Dementia is not a sudden disease, right? Things happen slowly. So anytime that you notice a major or a sudden change, for example, your loved one was speaking clearly yesterday, and today nothing that's coming out of their mouth makes sense. Today they're speaking in what we might call a word salad. Everything's jumbled up. That is a reason to call the doctor. Some physical conditions, some illnesses, infections, some medications can affect a person's ability to communicate. So any sudden change means that you need to address it with the doctor very, very quickly to make sure that you can rule out any physical problem that's causing that change. We'll get another quick video clip here.
I would advise couples, and I usually do advise the caregiver who comes to the group and is caring for a spouse, that you take your time. Always count to 3 before you respond, because it gives you time to think about your answer and what's going on. Generally, in a marital dispute, it's quick. It's back and forth. You're quick to give an answer. When they've been diagnosed, to sit back and say, okay, you're supposed to be the one that's reasonable here. Let's change how we do this, because there's only one thing you can control, and that's you. You cannot control them in their process.
Beverly's a support group facilitator, but she was also the caregiver for her husband who had Alzheimer's disease. And so she has a lot of experience in that. You can hear her saying, slow down, right? Count to 5, give yourself a minute. And there's a couple of other ways that you want to connect as well in the middle stage. You want to make sure that you're always approaching from the front and that you identify yourself. So call the person by name, say who you are, like, hey, Dad, it's your daughter, Vanessa. The reason you want to approach from the front is that when someone has dementia, other things are happening besides just memory changes, right? And one of the other changes is that folks' peripheral vision and their depth perception both change. So when someone has limited peripheral vision, if you approach from behind or along the side, you're going to startle them. Not a good way to start a conversation. Sometimes you want to, maybe reach out and touch the person on the arm, make physical contact with them if that's appropriate. Sometimes a gentle touch just shows that you care. But other times it can also get their attention or help direct them toward the task. So maybe if you want them to pick something up, you might touch their hand. If you want them to sit down, you might touch the seat of the chair that you want them to sit in. Maintain eye contact as much as possible. If they're seated or maybe lying down, try to get to their level so that you're on equal footing and can make comfortable eye contact. The other thing that Beverly brought up was that in marriages, in any familial or close relationship, we can have disputes. We can want to argue with the person or correct them or be right. And when someone has Alzheimer's disease or another type of dementia, there's really no space anymore for correcting them, arguing with them, or trying to impose your perspective. Most of the time that's going to backfire. That's going to cause the person to feel upset, irritated with you, maybe even embarrassed or hurt. So what you want to do is try your best to join their perspective, see things from their point of view. They're not able, because of their disease, to come out of their perspective and see things from your point of view. So it's your job to kind of flip that around and try to see things from their point of view. Be calm and patient. Try to keep a friendly, open face. They are going to be reading your facial expression. They're going to be feeling your energy and your tone of voice. So if you're tense and frustrated and you're saying all the right things, but you're saying it in an angry or a frustrated tone, that's going to come across. But your patient understanding is also going to come across if you express yourself that way. So pay attention to your tone. And just take your time. Give them enough time to respond, interact, connect. Give yourself that time too. I know I've said several times to slow down, and I'll probably continue saying it throughout this presentation, because giving time is one of the most important things about communicating with someone that has Alzheimer's or another kind of dementia.
She could sense my frustration, because occasionally I would lose my patience and I would bark at her. Why are you asking me that question again? I just answered that question 2 minutes ago. And then she would get frustrated because, she was very old school, and she's like, don't disrespect me. And I didn't ask you that question 2 minutes ago. It's a new question. So phase 2 of our relationship was like, okay, that's a new question. I'll answer it again.
And I appreciate what Rebecca says there, because she admits that there's interactions she's had with her mother that maybe she regrets, times where she made the wrong decision. But you will almost always get another chance. So if you've had interactions or conversations with your loved one that haven't gone so well, there's still time to change the way you're communicating and to have that go more smoothly, be more positive experience for both of you. You want to always be trying to join that person's reality. Take just a little time to see the world from their perspective right in that moment. And when you do that, when you shift your point of view to see it from their perspective, their behavior might make perfect sense, right? It might not make sense to you from your point of view that your spouse really wants to leave and go to work. But if you can shift and look at it from their point of view, and you see that it's 7:30 in the morning and they always left for the office at 7:30, it would make sense that that's what you want to do, right? So listen to figure out what their needs really are. Pay attention to the words, but also to the behavior. They may be saying one thing, but they may be feeling something else on a deeper level, and that might be what really needs your attention. So for example, talking to someone about giving up driving. You know, the doctor says you can't drive anymore. We gotta give up the driver's license. They might say, I can still drive just fine. I've been driving since I was 14 and I have never had a ticket. Now, is the problem really that they've been driving since they were 14 and they've never had a ticket? No, you know, that's part of it, but really that contains the feeling, I don't want to give up my independence. Please don't take that away from me. The words, stop taking over my life, or you're not in charge of me. I'm the parent, you're the child. That's part of what's going on. But that might also reflect the meaning, I hate this. I hate this disease. I don't understand why I can't do what I want to do, right? So let the person know you understand what they might be feeling. Let them know you're here for them. If they do bring up a specific question, give them an answer, make it brief and to the point, but then move on to addressing the emotion. So for example, you know, if the person is saying, I don't want you to take my driver's license, there's no reason to take it. You might say, you know, you seem sad. Do you feel sad? And wait for their response. If they say yes, you might want to try to guess the cause and say, you know, do you miss the way things used to be? I do too, right? If you can identify and speak to the emotion behind someone's behavior, like if they're rummaging through their possessions and you say, it seems like you're looking for something, what's going on? They might be trying to communicate boredom, or they might need something. If someone is in the shower and they're pushing you away or they're hitting, it might be that, you know, they're too hot, they're too cold, they're uncomfortable with being in this vulnerable situation with you, right? Or they might just feel out of control. So these are all ways to try and address the underlying emotion, okay? Respond to that emotion and then reassure the person and redirect them to some other activity to help them move on. So for example, for our person who is sad and upset about not driving, you'd say, I know I feel badly about it too, and I wish that it wasn't happening. But what I'm really glad about is that at least I'm here with you today. And let's go for a walk outside, or let's go to the park and see if we can feed the ducks, right? Let's get out of here for a few minutes. In this way, you're moving the person along from that negative emotion, from feeling sad or from feeling angry, into doing something active that can shift their perspective and also lift their spirits. Again, slow down. You want to make sure that you're only asking one question at a time. And maybe offering an A or B choice, right? So rather than saying, what do you want for lunch? You could say, do you want a sandwich or should we order a pizza, right? One or two. It can also help to offer the choice you think is best at the end of the sentence, or if there's a choice you are pretty sure they actually prefer, right? So if I know that they really want a sandwich, I'll put that at the end of the sentence. People will usually, if they can't really choose, if they don't have the ability to make that choice anymore, they'll usually choose whatever came last, whatever is newest in their mind. Okay. You want to limit distractions, especially if you're doing anything important or trying to have you know, some sort of important discussion. So for example, if you're trying to help somebody sit down and focus on eating their lunch or getting dressed, turn off the TV, turn down the music, don't have too many people around. Don't try to have a conversation with them while they're doing something. Focus your communication with them on instructions and guidance on how to do that thing. This is again where you might want to offer a guess or fill in the word for them if they can. Ideally, you will have already talked to them about whether this is something that they would like. You're going to start using visual cues a lot more and gestures, right? So I talked about, for example, putting your hand down where you want them to pick something up, or putting your hand on the seat. You may need to write things down, reminder notes, calendars, labels, lists. All of these things can help. They're not going to be 100% effective all the time, but they can help. Repeat as needed and try to maintain patience when returning, you know, to the same topic again. and try to turn anything negative into a positive if you can. So for example, if the person doesn't like to be helped in the shower, instead of saying, okay, time to go take a shower, you might say, let's go get ready. Cindy's coming this afternoon, right? Turn that negative into a positive outcome. And avoid quizzing the person. So, you know, for example, don't ask things like, hey, do you remember? Or, hey, Dad, what's my name? Or when's your birthday? Try to avoid things like that. It may feel like you're having the person practice or like you're stimulating their mind, but actually what it's doing is putting them up against an answer they don't have, right? Again, focus on feelings rather than facts, and make the adjustments that you need to validate the person, help them feel comfortable. The most important thing is that they feel reassured, that they feel like you're on their team, right? That you guys are working together. Now, in the late stage, you're going to notice, again, a big change in the person's communication with words. Folks may be reduced to using just a few words or perhaps even just sounds. They may respond to really familiar phrases. So, for example, you know, the gentleman I talked about that always told me he was fair to Midland, or I had a resident when I was an executive director. If you started singing the song Sioux City Sue, right? Old song. She would jump in and finish the whole thing. Anything that you needed her to do, if you started singing a little song, she would jump in, start singing, and then she would, while she was singing, be totally happy to do whatever you asked her. You want to be sure that you're looking out for expressions of discomfort or pain. So someone might not be able to tell you what hurts or where it hurts, or even articulate that they're in pain, but you might see a tight expression on their face. You might see their body posture contract, or them touching a part of their body that's uncomfortable. Keep an eye out for that. Just help them feel safe and happy. That might even extend to just saying to them, you're safe. I'm here with you. I'm so glad we're together, right? Continue talking to them, even if they can't understand the words you're saying very well or at all. They can hear your voice. They can feel your kindness and your mood coming through to them. And you want to make sure that you use all 5 senses to communicate. We'll touch on that a little bit more in just a second. But, you know, using sensory connection is a really great way to communicate with someone in the late stages of dementia through touch, sight, sound, smell, taste, right? Even though they can't talk to you, they can still connect with you in these various ways. We'll talk about that in just a moment.
I know that my mom feels aggravated. I know that she feels alone. I know that she feels confused. And I know on any given day, I don't know if I've made it better for her. I try. In these later stages, I've come to recognize that being really aware of the 5 senses is really important. Touch seems to give her a great deal of comfort. I know when I come over, I'm going to brush her hair all the time. And my husband noted to me recently, he said, you know, you should see the look on your mom's face when you're brushing her hair. She's just happy. She's just happy. She doesn't say a lot. And I do it for a long period of time. I comb it, I braid it, I do funny things with it, but it just allows me to just be with her in a way that makes her feel comfortable.
When I was in assisted living, all of the places I worked in assisted livings, actually, every place I ever worked, we did nails at least once a week. For women and for men, for everybody, we would have a nail salon day. And that was because we wanted to, first of all, do some hygiene, right? Make sure everybody's hands and nails were clean and trimmed. But also it was a really good way to connect with people because you're giving that physical touch that often we don't get enough of. We would give hand massages, we would paint people's nails, we would rub their arms, all of these ways that we could connect and help them relax and feel cared for. You might find other ways to connect through touch, like if the person did any knitting or sewing or other arts, try to engage with them that way. Let them feel different fabrics. Put the eye objects in the bag and see if they can identify those by touch. Or even just something like if there's an animal, you know, petting a dog, petting a cat. These are things that can give us a really good sense of connection. And then, you know, just holding someone's hand or rubbing their back can be a really powerful way to connect. People may not always understand exactly what they're looking at or who's in a photo, but there's a lot of great ways to connect through sight. There are beautiful books and photo albums and puzzles all made now specifically for people with dementia that have simple, brightly colored, interesting pictures. You can watch videos together, right? There are beautiful travel videos, train ride videos, bicycle videos on places like YouTube and Vimeo, totally for free, that you can watch together. Paint with watercolors, right? Just go outside or sit by an open window and look at what's going on. Feel the sunshine on your face, feel the breeze, see the people and their pets that are going by. Is a really excellent way to connect with someone through their sight and touch at the same time. Right? Familiar music, including, you know, favorite songs or songs that were a part of the person's childhood and early adulthood, can be really great. Lots of people, like I mentioned, my friend who knew the song Sioux City Sue, lots of people retain music and familiar lyrics or poetry for a very, very long time, longer than they retain other information, other memories. You might listen to some nature sounds or read poetry or read a short story to them. We used to just read the weather report. We would go through the newspaper and ask every person what city they were born in, and we would read the newspaper weather for that place, and we would talk to them about where they were from. And maybe they didn't remember all the details, but talking about them, making them feel special, and talking about where they were from was always a really great way to connect with some of our participants, residents, and clients. You just want to let them hear the tone of your voice and feel that they are the center of your attention. You can also connect through smell through things like aromatherapy or using scented lotions, things like that. You can cook food or offer the person foods that smell good, right? I would caution, if you're connecting through things that have a smell, make sure that either they're safe to eat or that the person can't eat them, okay? That they're totally away from the person, because often, especially in the late stages, folks have difficulty identifying things that are safe to eat and are not. And anything that's close to the mouth, they might open their mouth and want to eat it. So when this slide talks about cotton balls dipped in essential oil, I would be cautious with the way you present that to the person. Connecting through taste. I think most of us like to eat. Most of us like to eat things that that we really love, that remind us of a better or more fun time, right? Popsicles, flavored drinks, things like that can be really good, especially if you're having a hard time keeping your loved one hydrated. When someone doesn't want to sit down and drink a glass of water, maybe you can get them to drink, you know, something that's got a little flavor to it. Maybe some juice thinned out with some water so that they've got a little bit of both. Be careful with this and speak with the person's doctor. Many people, you know, in the late stages of dementia will start to have changes in their ability to swallow. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're being safe about choking hazards. So just provide what the person can swallow safely. But a lot of these things can be enjoyed by all folks, right? Even in the very late stages. Now, to summarize just a bit, we've talked about 3 major stages of dementia, right? Early, middle, late. But in all of these stages, there's a few universal things we want to make sure that we're doing. And that is, first of all, meeting the person where they are, joining their reality, because they can't come to ours, okay? So just accept the fact that you're going to have to hop into their point of view and do your best to do that cheerfully and as calmly as you can. Remember that the person retains a sense of self despite the losses. So despite losing memories, despite losing other skills like language and many other things, the person that they were is the person that they are. Their unique sense of self exists. If they hated cilantro, they probably still hate cilantro. And if they love jazz music, they probably still love jazz music. So think about what you know about them, who they are at the core of themselves. And that's how you want to connect. Connect through feelings, connect through emotion. You want to always treat the person as the adult they are. I think in some ways there can be a tendency when we approach someone who has difficulty speaking to talk down to them. We naturally equate a smaller vocabulary or simpler speech with, maybe someone being childlike or a person not understanding. And a lot of the time, especially for people with dementia, their speech, their ability to express themselves is changing faster than their ability to understand. So even though their spoken language might be very simple and very limited, they may very well still be able to understand you, and they certainly can still understand your intention, your tone of voice, and your mood. So what you want to do is help meet the needs while also meeting them where they are. And again, you want to just always portray that you care, that they are safe with you, and that you are on their side. You guys are a team. You're going to deal with this together.
Taking care of yourself while you care for somebody with the disease not only impacts your own health, but it really can impact the person with the disease. So, for example, if you're not getting enough sleep, you might be easily irritated, which will then sort of spill over to your interactions with the person with the disease and maybe being short with them, which then might cause them to get frustrated. So it's not only important to take care of yourself for your own health, but really for you to really be a good caregiver.
So all of those things that I just described to you, all of those communication skills, they all take work and they take energy, physical and emotional, right? So I want to encourage all of you, just like Dr. Fazio said, to take care of yourselves. And one of the ways that you can do that is by getting some support. So you're here on this call, this education opportunity provided by Kensington, which is wonderful. I'm so glad that you're here and listening to this. You can also reach out to us at the Alzheimer's Association anytime, day or night. So just give us a buzz at our helpline, 800-272-3900. You can have questions answered. You can register for education. You can find support groups, all sorts of things. So just like I said, just give us a buzz if we can help. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back to you, Susan.
Thank you so much. And I just need to take a moment and recognize, I noticed so many men on this webinar, and I think that's so important. I'm so glad you're here. 2/3 of everyone that's diagnosed with Alzheimer's is a woman. They attribute that to our hormonal changes in our life, but I'm just so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here because the support is so incredibly important. And my big takeaway today, after going through this journey with my father, is that Alzheimer's has feelings. And sometimes in the journey, when you lose the person, you have to remember that their feelings are still there. And it's so hard to recognize that without having communication. And so I just love what you said about the senses, Vanessa. I love what you said, that Alzheimer's has feelings. And my big lesson also is ask the question the same way, because what I would tend to do, and I would do this even talking to my kids, right? I asked you to, and then you rephrase it because you think you didn't get through the first time. And I think that's really important. And I encourage everyone to ask questions. We have questions from registration, but I'm going to start with a question from Samantha. And I love this question. I think it will appeal to a lot of people. And that is, how do you engage with someone when they misplace things and accuse someone else of stealing them? And they weren't stolen, but they think that they've been stolen and they're very angry.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Samantha. And I'm sure a lot of people on this call have had that exact situation. It's super, super common. And this is where I'm going to ask you to do that shift of perspective, see things from their point of view, right? Join their reality. Where this comes from is that when someone has dementia, they are losing memory, right? Short-term memory, so they're forgetful. And they're also losing judgment and reasoning skills. So that together makes this behavior, makes this sort of misunderstanding. So the person misplaces, for example, their keys, can't find them, that's short-term memory. And then they can't reasonably, conclude, oh, I misplaced my keys, I'd better go look for them. They conclude, where are my keys? Who took them? You took them, right? So their logic is going just in a different way than yours. So the first thing to do is to shift your perspective, see it from their point of view, and you can see that what they're doing, the way they're behaving, makes sense to them. So the next thing I'm going to ask you to do is try to respond how you would like someone to help you in that situation. If someone stole your keys, you'd want someone to help you find them, right? You wouldn't want someone to tell you that everything was okay. That would make you feel really upset probably. So I'm so sorry that your keys are missing. Let me see what I can do. It'll be okay, right? Not they're here somewhere, you're fine. But let me see what I can do. I'm going to help you. Is how I would respond to that.
That's good advice. This is a great question for you in your journey, your career. If your family member is in some type of community, memory care community, and they want to come home and they're not able to, how do you direct that?
Yeah, I think that's also really difficult. And I'm sure, Susan, you see that a lot, especially with folks that have recently moved into a community, right? I would, again, try to see things from their point of view and think about when mom or dad or husband or wife says, I want to go home, where are they talking about? Home is not really a place, right? Home is a feeling. And a lot of the time when our loved ones with dementia want to go home, they might say that even when they're in their own house, right? So they're seeking a feeling of comfort and of belonging. They're thinking of feeling safe. And so offering that to them, right? Don't say you are home or you can't go home, you have to live here now. But say, I know, you miss the way things used to be, but let's do this here, right? Or you can say something like, we'll see about that later, but for now, look at this amazing thing that's happening, and redirect the conversation.
I think redirecting is so important because then they get involved in what they're redirecting to, and they actually forget that they said home. But I love that home is really not a place. It's really a feeling. I think you're exactly right on that. This woman is having some challenges. How do I get my dad to let me help him?
That can be really difficult, and it sort of depends on what sorts of things you're having to help with and what your relationship historically with your dad has been. A lot of that really depends. One thing I would say is if you want to have a really in-depth conversation about your specific situation with your dad, give us a call at the helpline and they will do that with you. They'll go through all the things you've already tried and give you some more suggestions. But generally speaking, I think it helps to approach it, again, like you're on the same team. So instead of saying, Dad, I need you to let me take care of your finances, you could say, Dad, what if you and I got someone to help us with our bookkeeping? I would really like us to do that together. Or, if it's around driving, like, Dad, could you take me? Could we drive together? Things that make it about your relationship and about it helping you too, instead of just being about you doing things for them or to them.
And I think that answered a question here about how can you gain the trust of a stubborn older adult? And that's the we, the us, rather than you and I. I think that's brilliant. And someone just asked, my mom basically can only say yes or no. And she calls me sometimes and I don't know how to have a phone conversation with her or to figure out why she called. Any suggestions for the phone?
Yeah, that is tough. Talking on the phone is really hard, especially when someone only has a few words. One thing I would suggest is, if there's someone else around that you can follow up with after you get off the phone, just to make sure she doesn't really need something. If she's got someone that she lives with, or if she's in a community, maybe give a call to the front desk and say, hey, mom just called me. Can someone go check in on her? But while you're actively on the phone with her, if she doesn't seem upset, if she seems like she's just happy to be talking to you, just talk to her for a few minutes. Tell her about what you've been doing. Share a story with her, from your childhood, maybe. Tell her a memory that's really important to you. Just kind of have a nice chat for a couple minutes and then say, okay, mom, love you. Talk to you soon.
That's really good. And that's really the extended family network or caregiving network that you spoke about before, is to having someone else that can actually be another, eyes and ears on the person. How do you know when home care is no longer a best fit for your family member? How do you know when you need to really look at moving them?
I think it's different for everybody. The number one move trigger for me is always safety. If it's not safe, if there's no way to be sure that in an emergency someone can get to that house and help your loved one, then it's not safe for them to be at home. For some people it's sooner than that because the social implications are so important, right? Some people are really social and they need to be around other people. And so it might be much sooner than that. But absolutely, if there's ever a question of what would happen if there was an earthquake, if there was a fire, if there was a flood, that person should not be, at home with someone coming to check on them anymore.
Or turn the fireplace on, or turn the stove on, or
right, microwave something that shouldn't have gone in the microwave, right?
Yeah. For me, actually, I was so worried about my mother, because even with caregivers in the house, in the home, my father would still gravitate towards my mom, and it became it was very hard to watch. He would become very frustrated with her, and I didn't want to lose both my parents to Alzheimer's. Here's a question about long distance caregiving. That's challenging.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of challenges to long distance caregiving. And again, I think this is something where taking the time to talk it out with somebody, whether that's the caregivers that you have looking out for the person, whether that's if they're in a community like Kensington, whether that's talking to, the staff at the community and saying, how are things really going? Finding a way to connect with them, whether that's a video chat, whether they are able to take a phone call, but finding a way to actually hear things directly from your loved one on a regular basis is great. But I think also having an outside set of eyes, again, whether that's a friend, a neighbor, the folks in the assisted living or, day program, whether that's someone like a geriatric care manager, which is a person who kind of coordinates all the little bits, on behalf of the loved ones. Those are all really good ways. And the other thing I would say is that as a long distance caregiver, you should seek local support. So find a support group by you, find other either long distance or hands-on caregivers. I think often folks think that because they're not there hands-on touching the person with dementia, that they're not a caregiver and that they don't deserve or need the support, but they need at least as much support, maybe sometimes more.
Yeah, we haven't touched on that G word, the guilt word, but there's just so much guilt associated with caregiving. Sometimes you just don't feel you're doing enough, and everybody needs to know that you're doing what you can, especially on those videos. I thought those were brilliant, count to 3. We should all be doing that. So I thought what Becca said was very nice. And a last question is, how can I help a family member adjust to assisted living facility or some type of senior care?
Yeah, well, I think that is different for every single person and every different relationship. What I will say is that it may take longer than you think, but basically everyone will adjust. And I think
Right.
Susan, again, you're in it every single day. You see, it's usually not going to happen overnight or in a couple of days. So being consistent, if the person doesn't like it at first or isn't sure about it or is worried, be consistent in saying that this is going to be okay, that you understand how they're feeling, that you're here for them, listen. If they've moved into an assisted living, I would make a really strong effort to pass on their dependence on you for everything to the folks in the assisted living. So if they call you and they say, I want to go home, this place, I don't want to be here. You might want to say, well, what's going on right now? Isn't it about time for dinner? Have you seen Susan lately? I know you were really looking forward to seeing Susan today. So shift it over to there and shift it to the folks that are going to be actually working with them every day. You want to reinforce their trust, right, in the folks at the community or in the caregiver who's coming over. What we want to avoid is what you said was happening with your mom, right? That even with caregivers in the house, your mom was still the caregiver. And doing all of that, what ideally your dad would have transferred some of those asks onto the in-home
Right.
caregivers.
I think that's really good. Or that you love, Chef Tony's grilled cheese. Are you going to have that for lunch today? And just read what they love there. It's all about the feelings. I just want to reiterate to everybody that joined us that you'll receive a copy of the webinar with links to the Alzheimer's Association, and please share with friends and families. And Vanessa, you're just such a gift to this community. The Alzheimer's Association is lucky to have you, and thank you for being a friend of Kensington's.
Thanks for having me.
Be safe. Have a nice night, afternoon, dinner, wherever you are.